Welcome to Difficult Conversation Africa broadcast. I present to you the host, Yinka Olaito.
All right, it's another opportunity at Difficult Conversation Podcast Africa. My name is Yinka Olaito. Today episode we'll be looking at a very concerning topic, disability and inclusion ecosystem across Africa. Many are not aware that they are ableist when it comes to ecosystem definition. So today we're looking at some of the vital issues that represent being an ableist and all of that. Ableism is often loud, but more often it is quiet. It shows up in inaccessible building, exclusionary policies, job descriptions that assume normal, and system designed without person with disability in mind. Across Africa, disability is still shaped by structural inequality, cultural stigma, and policy failures. These are some of the things that a person with disability continue to face. While many African countries have ratified several laws, everyday reality tell a different story for person with disability, especially in our cities. Our cities are built without ramps, schools without learning accommodation, health system without sign language or assistive device, and political processes that quietly exclude person with disability. For many Africans with disability, survival is not just about personal strength, it is also about navigating gaps created by poverty, weak social protection system, informal economies, conflict, and outdated beliefs, stereotypes, and misgivings that put a person with disability in a negative tragedy as well as cause or a pity person. In this episode, I'll be looking at Ableist society, surviving the gap in an Ableist African society. And my guest today is Karen Muruiki, an autistic self-advocate, award-winning disability inclusion influencer, TV, neurodiversity consultant, who is based in Nairobi. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for having you, and thank you because of what you do. It's important that people like you step up conversation around our society, African society, and raising gaps that are existing. So we go straight to the question and the deliberation. And I want to ask you, Karen, in African complex, how does ableism show up in everyday life, from homes and schools to market, transport, and public offices?
Yeah, so ableism obviously is the teething problem that is still existing within our societies, even in government incentives. Actually, this is really very rampant. When you look at the situation, the environment that we live in, we find that still a lot of people have no clue about what disabilities are. And the perceptions that we've obviously seen in relation to ableism is based from a cultural perspective. You look at societies, how they perceive persons with disabilities across the continent. So this is a recurring issue. This has always been an issue across Africa. And even in my own country of Kenya, we've seen very concerning cases that emanated from ableist practices that especially from a very household environment, that you find persons with disabilities still being hidden. As a result of that, they look at, especially those with certain disabilities, such as those with psychosocial, intellectual, and neurodevelopmental disabilities. These are the issues. These are the areas that now that are very common. On family settings, we find that when you find that your child is born with a disability, that automatically means that, they find that to be a problem. They find that person, or even kick out that, especially if you are a mother, you have given a birth to a child with a disability, let's say that child is a curse to that family. So that is like automatically means that that child is a curse. So obviously that the spouse to the mother to that child, or even the father to that child with a disability, is always castigated against. So that is in the area of families. So even in the work environment where we live, we still find cases of ableistic practices being done. And it's very, very concerning that a lot of persons with disabilities are still facing rejection as a result of how people perceive the perception of the society. And that's also inclined to schools as well. In the educational system, we find cases that now like now what happened, there was a case that really happened, I think a month ago, last month, whereby a young man who has an neurodevelopmental disability was turned away from pursuing his education, his high school education, on the basis of disability. This called for community action to ensure that this does not happen again. So I think this is as a result of how the community and how the society views people with disabilities, even on a policy driven path.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Karen, for that short answer. The fact that you also cited an example of a child that was denied access to school, and that is happening almost across every African countries. Recently, something happened to a nurse here in Nigeria too that we are already pushing, where she was denied access to right education because entrance exam to a federal institution because of visual impairment. And sometimes we find ableism and ableistic approaches everywhere where people, it's not very loud, but they don't make provision. And people don't know that they assume they know, they don't know anything. But let's go into the proper discussion. And how do cultural and religious beliefs about disability shape stigma? I know this is something that is common across Africa, not only in West Africa. I think it's everywhere that we have find out that religious and cultural beliefs shape the way people perceive person with this stigma within the family dynamics and access to opportunity. You are a self-advocate for autism. Well, what have been your experience about religious and cultural practices that are strengthening ableism in African society?
Um, what I can say is that religion, obviously, religion has played a very negative role in how persons with disabilities are being perceived. You find that there are some cases like when you bring your child to, when you go to church, there are some cases like the minister or somebody tells you, oh, we need to pray for you so that your disability goes away, especially for somebody with a hidden disability. If you bring your child, let's say me as an autistic person, there are some instances like they'll come and pray for you, like to make sure that your autism just disappears. It's very common. And even I can tell you from I've spoken to caregivers. That's why they fear bringing their children to the churches, because of how the community treats them. How they think that that child is possessed by a demon, or if you find somebody, especially those types of disabilities that I have. I'm autistic, and that in itself, it brings that perception. It brings that kind of negative perceptions towards autistic individuals, whereby they think that because you have that type of a disability, you're supposed to be hidden and you're not supposed to exist. And that has really contributed negatively to how, especially those who are neurodivergent, persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities are being treated, even those with other disabilities, those common ones that we all know. Still, they claim that because you're born blind, let us try and make you see. oh, because you have a physical disability, let us try and make you walk. So the religious society has really heavily contributed to stigma. And it is very worrying that even in societies, even now, I've even seen I've seen very, very worrying cases of persons with intellectual and neurodevelopmental disabilities being hidden because of how the religious society views them. And it's not just from a religious standpoint, but also from a cultural standpoint, especially in the rural parts of Africa. And that obviously has been met. There was a case, actually, I can remember, Yinka, that we had highlighted of a 9-year-old non-speaking autistic boy in the county of Meru that was locked up in a structure for 7 years, not receiving the much needed help that is supposed to be catered for that child. We raised concerns regarding that. And finally, somebody was able enough to release that child to get the necessary assessment and treatment, and also therapy services for that child. So I think I think that's a concern that I have. And still, even now within society, we need to really educate
Yeah, thank you,
our
Karen,
religious.
for the
Yeah.
feedback. Then I want to ask you the next question, which is very important to me, and that is, what does survival look like to a person with disability in informal economy and community or conflict affected area? You have shared as your lived experience within the churches and religious bodies, what you have seen. Now let's look at what does for person with disability in conflict areas, informal economy, rural community, and conflict affected areas. What does survival actually look like?
Through community awareness, I think in one of the underserved areas, we look at community support systems that are geared towards supporting persons with disabilities in those areas that are underserved. Another thing that we have to look at is supported living. And then, of course, awareness raising. It's one of the key areas that we feel is very key for us to ensure that our survival matters when it comes to community engagement and awareness, and supported and through capacity building and support from other stakeholders and non-state actors. Then through resource mobilization, then that means that persons with disabilities are able to survive. They are able to now fend for themselves with a much needed resource, with a much support that they are awarded in spite of how the economic situations are. So that is the contributions I can actually see.
That's very fantastic, because person with disability within rural communities, their survival depend on a lot of issues, knowledge of their parents and the environment, the ability to have assistive technology, particularly, and the same in a conflict zone where there's chaos and all of that. For person with disability, survival is really something that they create for, particularly the issue, even within the climate change impact and all of that. Survival for person with disability differ for person without disability. And thank you for the input that you actually show. So for you, education is often the first major gap for person with disability. And oftentimes, person with disability are denied access to education because of inaccessible school, inaccessible infrastructures, lack of trained teachers, and all of that. So for you, especially in Kenya and all other Africa that you have seen, how has the system failed them? How has they been excluded by African school system? You might give an example from Nairobi.
Yeah, I think with the case study that has happened, with the current, with the situation that has just happened in one of the students, a grade 10 student being denied access to pursue secondary education on the basis of disability, it is very, those are the common situations that we have seen, whereby persons with disabilities are still facing exclusion and discriminatory practices on the basis of disability. You find that the national schools that have done really well in the national exams, like we're looking at KCSE, we find that those national schools that do very well, they're on the news for the wrongest of reasons. And one that you had even highlighted is the fact that there's discrimination and other ableistic practices that, these students can only do well in specialized schools that are catered to their needs. And that is where we talk about segregated learning. And that is where we do not want to see happen to any child with any disability, to any child on the basis of disability, being segregated, being forced to go to a school that is tailor-made to their needs, yet they can be able to learn just like their peers without disabilities. So one of the things that we have to really see is through teacher trainings, and we have to also make it our responsibility. We have to ensure that teachers are trained on disability mainstreaming in schools and how best they can offer that support to students with disabilities, either through reasonable accommodation, to assistive technology, or the hiring of sign language interpreters and materials that are accessible to them, and infrastructure. So we've seen cases of such, especially now that in Kenya, we have seen that concerning cases that we've seen students with disabilities being turned away, or even in lower graded schools, like even private schools, we've seen students who are autistic being turned away from pursuing education in a mainstream institution because of the fact that they're autistic, that teachers are just being very hostile towards them and say, oh, we don't admit such students. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to change the negative attitudes from teachers, and that is through systemic awareness raising and teacher training that is tailor-made, that is in line with a disability mainstreaming training programs that should be mandatory. And when we look at the Persons with Disabilities Act that we have now, that we're trying so hard to implement, Section 21 ensures that no child with disability will be excluded from the basis of disability from even pursuing education in either with a national or a private institution, or even tertiary institution on the basis of disability. So this is where we need to now, when we're implementing the act, we have to go to those schools and train those teachers, even school heads. They need to also be present in such trainings, and it should be mandatory as mandated by law and within the Act of Persons with Disabilities Act of Section 21.
Thank you, Karen. The next question I want to ask is this. I really appreciate the fact that you will always advocate for inclusive education instead of segregated education. The next thing I'd like to ask you is this. In terms of unemployment, even when you have finished school as person with disability of Africa, ableism is still very noted, very, very clear among that most of these persons with disabilities still suffer. So, unemployment rates among persons with disability remain extremely well. We have seen that unemployment rate among persons with disability remain high across Africa. What systemic barrier keep workplace inaccessible and hostile? Your own from your personal experience or what you have seen?
One thing that we've seen so far is just the negative perceptions towards persons with disabilities, whereby they come up with those questions, especially at job interviews, like, how can we be able to cater to your needs? Like, if in case, like, for example, like, you have an employee with a physical disability, how can you be able to perform at work if you have this kind of an impairment? Like, are you able to offer the results that we want as an organization? These types of questions that really come up are really very condescending questions that are really hindering the hopes and dreams of employees with disabilities. And also another aspect that I've also seen is that how best can we place you in how can we be able to offer you that accommodations if our organization doesn't have that kind of incentive? These kinds of questions that you keep being asked during the job interviews. It's like they do not want, they think that they think that you're going to pose a threat when it comes to uh, accessing you asking for reasonable accommodation for you to perform well in your work in the workplace, rather than these kinds of things. That fear factor and that kind of perception that they have because they claim that our organization cannot afford, and then these kind of things that you hear that, because of budget, this budgetary thing, or when it comes to hiring of sign language interpreters or providing like assistive technology, it's especially if you are an employee who is blind and you require JAWS for you to, these kinds of stuff that you hear every single time. Yeah.
All right. The next question that is important to me: how does gender intensify ableism? That's really been a very concern. You are a lady. As gender intensify ableism for you? For example, for women and girls with disability facing violence, poverty, or political exclusion, what does it look to you?
Um, a variety of things I can even mention is gender-based violence, domestic violence, was especially women with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities. We've had that. Of course, lack of access to sexual and reproductive health. We've had cases of women uh, still being excluded from accessing meaningful health that is tailor-made to themselves. And of course, maternal deaths that are regarding women with disabilities. So these are the cases that have been on a daily basis within our context. So we've
Yeah,
seen that
thank you.
happen most of the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So for women with disability, we find out that ableism is more pronounced because ableism is assigning a proper, what we call proper body function to a body part. So if your definition of that you must be able to run with your leg, and you can't run with your leg, um, that means that leg is not normal or abnormal. So we find that these are some of the things that happens almost every time. Now, the question is, for you, political participation remain limited among persons with disability. Why are persons with disabilities still largely absent from African decision and policy making processes?
Reason is because there lack of goodwill, lack of political goodwill. We've seen that all the time, and of course, stigma has also been an issue as well, and negative perceptions towards the decision making that involves us. So we've seen a lot of times when we want to, let's say, for example, you were discussing something on disability matters, and the only people that are present in the room are persons without disabilities. So we've seen a lot of lack of consultative goodwill, and of course the attitudes from even leaders. Political leaders have also played that kind of, have also been in the forefront of perceiving us negatively because of how they look at us. So yeah.
So, what role can African media, storytellers, and podcasters play in dismantling the gaps? Because we've seen that sometimes African media, storytellers are still strengthening the stereotype and creating or widening the gap that should not exist. So for you, you work with a radio station, Obongo TV, and all of that, and you advocate. What do you think that podcasters, storytellers, journalists what role can they play in reducing the gap or eliminating the gap of ableism across Africa?
One thing, if they want to eliminate stigma, is to understand the disability etiquette. They need to work with persons with disabilities. They need to do collaboration. And because we do a lot of shows that regard children, then they need to teach children without disabilities on how to be very empathetic through awareness raising. And that is one way, through awareness really. And it's one of the very key components. Like, if you're going to change the stereotypes of the media houses, then you have to teach them through awareness creation and proper disability etiquette language that they need to use within their shows.
Thank you, Karen. Beyond awareness, I also think that they need to be informed because if they're not fully informed, they will just be strengthening the negative neurotype. So they also need learning in shift narrative, in strengthening the right perception, the right based perception instead of pity and cause opinion that is or medical approach or sympathy approach that is already there. Because of our time, let's just go to the last question. And thank you, Karen, for being there. Now, let's look at government across Africa. What role do you think African government and institutions can they truly do to truly embrace disability inclusion? What practical changes will you want to see in the next 5 or 10 years in Nigeria, in Nairobi, Kenya, and across Africa in terms of what role government should play?
One thing that I would challenge the African governments, if they're talking anything to do with disability inclusion or anything matters to do with disability, they need to work closely with the organizations or persons with disabilities across the continent. We have the Africa Disability Forum. Their key mandate is advocacy and inclusion on matters to do with disabilities across the continent. They need to work closely with OPDs, national bodies. Like in Kenya, we have the National Council for Persons with Disabilities and our umbrella body, UDPK. They're we have been working closely with governments to see to it that our needs are being met. And even in Nigeria, I know you have a government umbrella body that advocates for the rights of persons with disabilities across Nigeria. It means also the government has to really work in tandem with OPDs across Nigeria, even in Kenya and other African countries, on a continental perspective. So they need to collaborate with the Africa Disability Forum in reaching those potential and to ensure that our principle of nothing about us without us is being felt. So I think capacity building and working with organizations of persons with disabilities across the continent is mandatory.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I've been speaking for our viewers. I've been speaking with Karen Muruiki. She's a self advocate for autism, being a person with autism under intellectual developmental disability. And I'm happy that she's able to affirm the fact that there are gaps and ableism within the African society need to be raised, that we need to work more, that persons with disability themselves and the community need to understand that the fact the community not to work with government, the government need to take its leadership role in ensuring that the gaps and the ableism tendencies within our society, our schools, is reduced to the minimum if it cannot be eliminated. I want to say thank you, Karen Muruiki, again for all that you do. A self autism advocate, person with autism herself under the intellectual developmental disability. And I'm so happy that your education and the effort that you are putting there in Nairobi, Kenya, is changing the landscape, shifting the narrative, and also being because that you're a broadcaster, you work with a TV station, and you use your platform to change and to advocate for persons with disability across Kenya and Africa at large. I want to say thank you once again, Karen, for being on our show, and I want to say thank you for all that you do. We're likely to have a second part um, of this episode, so we can talk more and more around some of the things that you have shared. You have also expressed your concern about schools, about unemployment, and roles of government. And I think that African government leaders are hearing or they are listening to us. For our viewers, I want to say thank you again for being part of this show. Please get back to us, share your thoughts on this conversation through our social media platform. Or if you have something important to say, please don't forget to send us a mail at info@difficultconversationafrica.org. Thank you once again. My name is Yinka Olaito. Thank you, Karen, and bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. For inquiry, please send an email to info@difficultconversationafrica.org. Telephone 0809 591. Please follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Difficult Conversation Africa. See you soon.